Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Ah, what's a good one. I like it. Good morning for those watching us through the internet. It's a pleasure to have all of you here. We're in the last Sunday of October, so we're going to continue talking about the New Testament. And today we have Marcos Diclei talk about the scriptures of John. What is in it for me? But before we start, as usual, I'm going to ask Eli to come do the initial reading and prayer.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Neither so much at sea nor so much on land, as the saying goes. This is an invitation to balance, to a position without extremes. Whenever you get excited and take an extreme position, you commit the same mistakes that you criticize in others. Moderation is the best way in a discussion, not because of laziness or fear, but because you have not mastered the subject to the extent demanded. Balance is revealed at the moment decisions are taken and positions are assumed. This is from Happy Life, Divaldo Pereira Franco by Joana de Angelis. So let's close our eyes. Try to bring the image of Jesus, His kindness, and thank all the spiritual world that can protect us, help our speaker today, enlighten him, and bring him all the knowledge we need to observe today. And above all, thank God and all the workers of His spiritual life that protect us, to bring us a great weekend and bless our week with all the needs and thoughts that we may bring to better our lives. So be it.
Dear friends, it's great to be with all of you here, and we are very thankful for the study that we just had, and that we are going to share with you all today. I'm not sure about you. I would like to know before we begin, who here has ever read any of the scriptures of Paul? I'm not talking about opening the gospel according to Spiritism, where we see a passage from Paul, or opening a book from John, or a book from Emmanuel where he talks about one versicle of John. Who here has ever opened the New Testament to study the Gospel of John or the other scriptures of John? We are all together. This is the first for me. This is why we have been studying the Gospels. Because for many of us Spiritists, especially when we are at the beginning, we think that Spiritism is something completely different and we don't go to the New Testament or Old Testament. This is for other religions, right? But one thing we learn after a while, and if you haven't learned that yet, I think it's better to start asking and talking to people around, is that there is no Spiritist doctrine without Jesus. Period. And John tells us that very, very clearly. And this is why we hope we can learn a bit more. This is why we ask, what is in it for me? Why would I ever care opening the New Testament or even the Old Testament? Yeah, there's a lot for us there. But maybe we don't understand that very well and we don't do it. So I'm glad that we are together here. I also want to welcome everyone who is also watching us online and encourage you please to participate. We have a digital medium over there. Carlos, everything you say, he will raise his hands and share with us over here. And I want us to do this together today. Let's learn together, because I know you have some knowledge, we have some, and together we learn better. And there is a gentleman called Tom Wright. He is a scholar, a world-famous scholar, who studies the Bible. He's a bishop in Europe, and he has done a deep study about the works of John, Paul, and many. It's just fantastic. And he says that John is one of his favorites because it impresses by the simplicity and at the same time how deep it goes. John is a different gospel. It's the most spiritual one, and we are going to see a little bit of that. The other thing that Mr. Wright says is, throughout centuries, many people who read the Gospel of John, they were able to see Jesus coming to life for them for the first time. They could see, all his splendor and his teachings in a way that they haven't seen before. A lot of people come through Christianity through the studies of the epistles of Paul, and this actually was very surprising to me and enticed me to read, and I hope by the end of our study today we all feel compelled to spend some time reading more about it. Right? That's the intent. Before anything, I wanna ask, and you guys need to help me out here. Who was Paul? Whoever is on the internet can type. Who was Paul? Who was John? My goodness. Paul, next month is all about Paul of Tarsus. Back. John. Yeah.
You're helping me, Sean.
Yeah. So who was John? One of the disciples. Okay. Wasn't John the Baptist the one who baptized?
No.
You sure?
Yes.
Okay. Because initially I thought, the book of John the Baptist. No, it's not John the Baptist. Although John talks a lot about John the Baptist at the very beginning, it is very interesting, that story. No, it is not. It is John the Evangelist, son of Zebedee. He had a brother called James, right? We know in Portuguese as Tiago Maior. In English is James. So he had a brother, and both were known by Jesus as the sons of thunder, because they were so passionate on everything that they did, right? And everyone admired them. Their professions, they were fishermen. Zebedee was a well-established fisherman. He had people working for him. He has a good business, right? And the two sons, you know how men were important, especially in past generations, right? They were at the front of the business. They have two sons. And Humberto de Campos, who is a spirit well known in Brazil, who gave us lots of beautiful stories of spirituality through our beloved medium Chico Xavier. He, in the book Boa Nova, or Good News, talks about the moment when Jesus approached John and James for the first time. They were both fishing. And Jesus came and said, "Sons of Zebedee, come and follow me." And immediately they both stopped what they were doing, jumped out of the water, and went there to talk to Jesus. First time they saw Jesus on that incarnation, right? Imagine a stranger coming, calling them, knowing the name of their father, and they just jumped into it and went there, talked to Jesus, and they were just marvelous. And John kissed Jesus' hands, and Jesus, passed his hands on his hair. And Humberto de Campos describes that it felt like they were old friends, good friends, rejoicing and meeting again. This is just marvelous, right? Imagine anyone in the presence of Jesus, even those who were persecuting him, would shake in his presence without ever know him on that incarnation. Imagine his presence. Now imagine someone who has been familiar with him. That's how it feels from John, right? Meeting him the first time. They both run home and told their parents what was happening. And it's just a beautiful story. Now there's another question. How old was John? Young? Very young. Interesting you say that. Good morning. Welcome. Because when we read the scriptures of John, how did he address people? My little children, right? My beloved children, or dear children. So usually a young fella doesn't address people like that, right? Or he writes in his letters, the elder. He calls himself the elder. It doesn't sound young, does it? Why is that? Because he wrote much later. But yeah, he was young. But how young? Umberto de Campos as well, in the book Chronicles Beyond the Grave, or Crônicas de Além Túmulo, he fast forwarding a lot, right? After Jesus was crucified and passed, after John himself passed, in the spiritual realm, Jesus calls John because he had a mission to John. And the title of the lesson is The Order of the Master. It was an order. So Jesus gave him an order. I won't tell you what it is because it's a topic for another day. It's a nice one. But what matters is Umberto de Campos described how John presented himself to Jesus, and he said he presented himself to Jesus with the same teenager candor, with the same teenager sincerity that he had when he met you. So he was a teenager. Now imagine your teenager running home saying, I met Jesus the Messiah and I want to follow him, and his other brother as well. And the father thinking, my two best men for the business going away with someone that I never met. They went there. Imagine that. Imagine us with our kids. And both Zebedee and Salome, mother and father, went there to meet Jesus, and they immediately recognized him and embraced him and said, Master, our sons are yours. This is an impressive story, right? That's how it started. That's how it started. So it's just very impressive. So he was very young. And when I reflected on this, I'm very happy to see that here, the TSS, especially this year, we really started to engage the kids and the teens or the youth as we've never done before. And we have to do that more. Because if we as parents or friends or relatives, we let the children make their choice after they grew up, it may be too late. The world is full of influences. It may lead us astray, and we all know that, right? So the importance of giving a moral education for them and presenting Jesus to them and the doctrine, the Spiritist doctrine to them at this early age, it is important. If they grew up in the future and decided to follow another religion, so be it. But at least we did all we can. So this story is inspiring for us as parents, as educators, and as friends or neighbors, right? Very, very important. What else we know about John? Anyone? Anyone on the internet knows anything about John? Okay, not much.
Marcos,
Yes.
he was the only one that was not killed, isn't it?
He was what?
He was not killed. He just died like
True. Yeah, Jacqueline is saying he was the only one who was not killed and died at very old ages. Yes. That's why in his letters he's referred as the elder. That's one thing. The other thing, we all know that he was there at the crucifixion with Mary, right? And there is a very known passage when Jesus, right before he leaves his body, he looks at John and said, John, this is your mother, asking John to take care of Mary. And then look at Mary and say, women, this is your son. So you're not alone. Right? And John actually takes care of Mary. The other passage that we know is on the transfiguration on the Tabor Tabor, the Mount Tabor, when Jesus saw Elijah, right, and other spirits over there. It was a spiritual manifestation, and John was there with the others. So he was always present with Jesus. He was an eyewitness from the early days of Jesus' works until his crucifixion and beyond. We know that. He actually, after the crucifixion, Paul, now I have to use the name of Paul, rightly so. Paul actually asked him, recommended him to take the lead in the church in Ephesus. And there he spent a couple years. He was able to receive a very simple house. It was donated by a man who had sympathy for the teachings of Jesus, and then he went there and brought Mary, and they lived together until Mary passed away. So that's where he did most of his writings, in Ephesus. Right? So he was the one who lived longest, and that's why his writings, his gospel, expresses the most deep feelings of Christianity, because he has seen it all. He has seen Jesus from the beginning. He has seen how Jesus was crucified. He has seen Jesus after the crucifixion. He has seen the persecution of all the Christians and many of his fellow apostles, right, being killed. And everything. So he has a lot of spiritual authority over the multiple churches at that time and the people. He's also unique for the clarity as he describes the eternal values of the Spirit. And for John, it's really black and white. There's no mid-term. He is very clear about the path that we are supposed to follow in life, about the teachings of Jesus. What is right and wrong is very, very clear. It's very clear. What did he write? So we know that he wrote one of the Gospels, right? Which is the fourth Gospel. Did he write anything else that we know? Apocalypse. Or the book of Revelations. We hear quite a bit about that. What else? That's it? As Paul, here's Paul again, he wrote 3 letters or epistles, right, to some of the churches or to some individuals in particular. And actually, the first epistle that he wrote, the letter, it was actually our personal favorite. It was really moving, with a lot of teachings and a lot of encouragement. It's just marvelous. The first letter of John. So he wrote the fourth Gospel. Why did he write another Gospel after we had already 3? Right? Matthew, Luke, and Mark. Why did he write another Gospel? Why we need another one? What is in it? Anyone? Because he's seen so much, and then he realized there's a lot missing. There's a lot of this history of Jesus that is missing. This was very impressive to us. 80% of what he wrote, 80% of what is in his writings, it is not anywhere else. And if you read Mark, Luke, and Matthew, we've seen a lot of things that are here and there, right? So that when we are preparing for some of the studies here, we actually go into the 3 Gospels and we find the same topic on the 3 different that Emmanuel explains in different way. But if you go to John, 80% of what he spoke about, it's not anywhere else. So it's very valuable. That's why no wonder he brings Jesus really to life in a different way. And no wonder it's deeper in spirituality. He wrote that at the very end of his age, in the year 94, 95, 96, right? And it seems that he passed around the year 100, so very close to the end of his that particular incarnation. And why did he write what he talks about? His goal was really to reinforce the faith in Jesus himself, because the persecution against Christians was so intense, was so hard. After Jesus passed, a lot of people were shaking in terms of their fate, and he said, everyone needs to know about what happened, who Jesus truly was, what he did, that he came back after he passed away, and that I touched him, I saw him, I spoke with him, and I want everyone to know. He wants to encourage everyone, right, after all that happened. And we will see a fundamental story about how tough was the environment starting next week, when we talk about the persecutions and the persecutor of the Christians, right? This is why he wrote, to give us hope, to give us faith, because it was a tough time. Most of the words that he used was actually life, because he wanted us to know that we are immortal beings. We have eternal life. That was the legacy of Jesus for us. We have eternal life. So he talks a lot about life. You see a lot of this life word in his text. Believe. He writes a lot the word believe, because he wants us to believe through the rational faith and through the facts that he saw. And he talks a lot about signs. Interesting enough, he doesn't use the word miracle. There is no word equivalent to miracle. The words that he used actually in Greek was to signs, because for him, and Spiritism teaches that there is no supernatural on anything that Jesus did. Everything he did is under the natural laws. Therefore, those are signs of the divinity of Jesus, of the spirituality of Jesus, but those are not miracles. There's no magic, right? So that's a little bit about the gospel itself. There's no mention of his name at all in his gospels, right? Like some of the apostles have their names on it. He never called himself by his name. And some say it's a sign of humility. He called himself the disciple whom Jesus loved. Not because Jesus loved him more than others, but because he has that deeper spirituality than others. His language is poetic, and he has a deeper sentiment, right? So he really felt loved, and that's why he calls himself. It's very interesting. So his text is full of symbols and figures and poetic language. It's very nice. So that's a little bit about the gospel itself. Now, the epistles, or the letters, the first one, which really touches us a lot, he wrote to the churches around. Because, this is very interesting, at that early days, after Jesus came and taught in the small churches or groups of people, their churches were like us here. Right? We're not talking about churches and cathedrals. No, it's a group of people who gather together to learn, to study, to help each other. Okay? So, at early ages, people already start to diverge from the core of the message of Jesus. And there were many groups saying, Jesus, this is very interesting, and it's written there in the letter of John. I was about to say John. And this is not from a Spiritist topic. It is said that there was a group of people going through those regroupments of Christians saying Jesus was a special being. However, when John the Baptist baptized him, he in the Spirit came to the body. And when he was about to be crucified, he left the body. So he didn't suffer as much as we think he suffered, because he is God. All sorts of things trying to take Jesus out of the human aspect, because he had a human life. Right? He was the purest spirit that we ever seen. He's the governor of a planet, has ever been, at least as far as we can go in our history, and will ever be the perfection that he is. But he would never break the natural law because he could. So everything that we saw and we heard from him suffering, he felt it. Because he wanted to give us the example of how to live, of how to love. So he wouldn't excuse himself for the sake of suffering. No, I already know that, so I'd rather not. So let me run away before things get tough. So people start to spread those ideas around. And John writes exactly about this. Those are the false prophets, people who are trying to change the history. And that's why he wrote what he wrote. And he was very concerned, even telling people, do not receive them in your homes, because they are deceivers. So he was tough in his message, but he always warning people about it and telling them what is right, what is wrong. And it was interesting to see it, because there are theories, right, from spiritualists that even started to come to Spiritism, saying that Jesus had a fluidic body or something. It was interesting to see that in his days. So it's an old story that we try to change things. So his letters, actually, it's an invitation to go back to the basics of Christianity. It's really going back to the basics. And this is why here at the TSS, once in a while we go back to basics again, because we need to go to the source and we need to be very careful. And he talks a lot about love, which is the essence. This is why we are here. He talks about sound faith, rational faith, faith based on facts, witnesses, eyewitnesses, people who saw it, right? And obedience. For him, it's very clear. It's black and white. Or you're doing it, or you're not doing it. Or you are with Jesus, or you're not with Jesus. If you're not, come back. Right. So it's very interesting to see that. Let me see if I can quickly give you one extract here. I thought I had marked here. This is the message we have heard from him, Jesus, and declare to you, God is light, and in him there is no darkness at all. If we claim to have fellowship with him, with Jesus, and yet walk in darkness, we lie, and we do not live out the truth. Or he says, do not love the world or anything in the world. If anyone loves the world, love for the Father is not in them. So there's a lot here. We don't have the time to go through it, but he was very precise, very, very precise, to not leave ambiguity from people. And he repeats a lot. And he repeats. There is even a Joana de Anjos and Divaldo Franco, they have in one of their books, The Poem of Love. It was a little story from Paul at his last days. John. I think I need to do the lecture next month. So from John at his last days, and he was with his group of followers every day, going to the place of gathering to discuss about the gospel and tell the stories. And they were already had to carry him because he was really weak already. So he went to the place and starts to talk with a group of people. And he said something that he often said. The teaching that is stuck in my memory in the strongest way possible was the teaching when the Master says, "My little children, love one another." And then a young man from the group said, "Sir, don't you have anything else to teach? We heard this so many times, and truly speaking, we are tired of it. Can you teach us something else?" And imagine John, with his heart full of compassion for the young man, with all the kindness and calmness we could ever imagine. He turned to the man and said, if you truly loved, you would be ready for more. But as we can see, your heart is full of impatience and bitterness. So what I have to tell you is, my little children, love one another. It's interesting, right? And this fits a lot for us, because sometimes we are so eager to learn so many things and read so many things and do so much training that we don't give a sequence, a continuity of something. It's like our New Year's resolution. Every year we have that long list. Maybe we should pick one thing and say, I want to learn this one thing here. For the long it takes, I'm going to pursue it. That's his message. That's why he repeats something. It's an intentional repeating, and actually that's how we learn. So it's not strange that as we read his works, we'll see that repetition. Right? So that's on his letters. And then the book of Revelations, or the Apocalypse, is full of symbols. It's quite difficult to understand, so many symbols. But many people think it's a book of tragedies or plagues, that we are all doomed. But that's not the case. It's actually a book of hope. Because for more that it describes wars and dissensions and, famine or hunger, so many tough things that humanity already passed or will pass, it gives us hope because God is overseeing and orchestrating everything in the background. This is what we learn from Spiritism, right? That God is behind everything, and all the suffering has a purpose. So there's a lot of prophecies, and one thing that we learn as well, especially with Spiritism, is that the prophecies, they are not meant to happen. It's not because it's written that yes, it's going to happen. They are warnings, they are alerts saying, if you go this route, this is where you're going to encounter if you don't take care. It's an alert, right? And if we hear and change the course, we can avoid them. If we ignore and follow exactly that path, we know where it's going to lead. Right? So those are the prophecies. So when we hear about end of the world and all that stuff, we got to be careful on that. Right? So the message is a message of hope, contrary to what it may seem. Now what impresses us quite a bit as well in the structure of the Gospel of John is actually the structure of it. And there is a theologian called Frederick Munz. He compares the structure of the Gospel of John with the architectural structure of the temple in Jerusalem. No worry, it's simple and easy. I'm going to make it quick. From the chapter 1 to the chapter 12, John describes actually the contact that Jesus had with the common folk, with everyone. Followers, non-followers, Jewish, non-Jewish, with the common people, with the Gentiles, with the Samaritan women, with everyone. He meets with everyone. And there's an analogy with the court of the Gentiles and the temple, which is this big area here on the right, and there's the same area on the left. We can see properly. But for the temple, there was a place for anyone to come, non-Jewish, Greek, right? Because they were very traditionalist. To go into the most sacred places of the temple, you have to be Jewish. You have to, have some positions. But this was an area for everyone. In the beginning of the Gospel of John, he actually describes, and the narratives are around his encounter with all those common people. So the Samaritan women, when he met the women at the water fount, it's there. When he met Nicodemus, who was a wealthy man, he was there at the very beginning. And remember that passage where he gets into the temple and see the man selling goats and cattle and doves, and he tells them, "Are you turning my father's house into a commerce, into a shop?" Remember that? And he throws everything. So the court of the Gentiles is exactly that place. That's where they set shop. We can see it here, but that's the place actually, right? And interesting to see when he does that. That's a description that we have here. When he does that and throw their things away, the priests, the authorities come to him and say, with what authority you do those things? Who are you to do such things? And they were threatening him. And then he says, destroy this temple and I will build it in 3 days. And they look and say, what are you talking about? It took 64 years to build this temple. How can you rebuild it in 3 days? And John, when he writes, he connects the dots. Because Jesus came back, right? After his past, he came back in the 3rd day. So the temple that he was talking about, he was prophesying that, are you threatening me? Destroy this temple and I will come back. I will build it again in 3 days. So that's why it's so rich, because as he wrote, he say, that thing that happened there, he was talking about this. And no one could understand, right? We are still trying to understand. But that's what is interesting with the Gospel of John, because he make that connection. Right? That was very nice. But we don't have the time to exchange too much. The second part, that's from chapter 13 to 17. There's an analogy with the place that is called the holy place. This is a place where the priest, which is at the very center of the temple, that only the priest in charge of the service on that particular day go, lit the incense and lit the menorah. It's a very intimate contact with God, right? Because for them, the temple, that area, it's a place where they get in contact with God. The priest wash his hands to purify as a symbol of spirituality, right? Cleanliness. Before he puts the bread, there's a ceremony that happens there, right? So that's only for the priest. It's actually on the chapter 13 is when Jesus gathered the disciples or the apostles for the Passover. And if we remember well, it was a very intimate meeting between Jesus and the 12 before he passed. And over there, this chapter 13 starts with Jesus washing their feet as the priest would wash his hands. And then Jesus, had supper with them and break the bread and share the bread as he often did, and calls them friends and tells them about the betrayal and tells that Judas would betray him, and talks about Peter and said, Peter, you are going to betray me or deny me 3 times. Oh, that is a very private conversation that he wouldn't have with the rest of people. He talks about the kingdom of God in a different way because they were closer to him. They were ready for it, right? So that's a great analogy. So we can see this blocks of narratives in his text very clear. So if you're looking for certain things, you know where to go. And then here as well, he talks about the promised comforter. Have you ever heard about the promised comforter? What is that about? Spiritism, yeah. Because he said, I am leaving. I won't be with you again. But fear not. I will send you a consoler, or another advocate, or another helper. You see different ways of calling it depending on the Bible translation that you get. But yeah, it's a Spiritism. Actually, that message from Humberto de Campos talks about exactly this. He was talking to John about the consoler. Right? So that's Spiritism. And he says, the consoler, the Spirit of truth, will explain the things that you can not understand today, or the things that I haven't been able to tell. You have it today, but you don't see it. But he was always with you and will always be with you. It's very nice. So that's where he talks about it, right? And just the message of washing feet, we had a lecture about this. This is just an amazing teaching for us about service and humility. Because washing the feet was an activity that not even the Jewish slaves were supposed to do, because it was too humiliating for the Jewish slave. So they had a non-Jewish slave to wash the feet. And the first thing that Jesus do, he puts himself in a position to wash their feet, giving them the teaching that we are here to serve. If you want to be the greatest, be the smallest, be in the lowest positions. And John tells him, are you crazy? Are you going to wash my feet? No way. And he says, Peter, if you don't let me wash your feet, you have no part with me. And he says, okay, you can wash my head, my hands, my feet. I'll wash everything you want. But as an example for us, you want to be the greatest in the Spiritist Center? Wash everyone's feet. You want to be the greatest in your church, at home, at work? Serve. And we think service is humiliation. I have a very close friend of mine who tells stories to me every time of people lying about their job because they are ashamed of what they do. What is that? It's pride. We shouldn't be ashamed. There's no job that is humiliating, right? That's the message of Jesus for us. We just don't stop to reflect on them, to bring them to our lives. What that washing feet means for me in my life. That's the invitation from the gospel to us. Because if we keep there 2,000 years ago and don't bring it to our daily lives, then we can make no connection. Then the gospel is meaningless. It's a bunch of fantasy, a bunch of words. But if we don't make the time, then it's not going to happen. I think it's a progression. The gospel is a progression. I remember my years of university where I had friends, and we together, they would take the pages of the Bible to make a cigarette and smoke, because it was so thin, the paper. It's a perfect paper for a cigarette. So the Bible was nothing. It's a piece of paper. I can use this piece of paper to smoke. Pre-said. Then, we found a religion. That's very good. So what we started to do, we got a Bible, the biggest possible, and then we'll put on the table, open, like that. And okay, leave it on the table. That will protect your house. That was the next step. At least it wasn't smoking the Bible. But that's to protect the house. Yeah, it's not working, is it? No. Something is wrong. Then we got to know the Spiritism. And we saw, oh, that's so marvelous. That's the beginning, right? After a while, oh, that's nice. I went to so many lectures. It's not working, is it? Nah, not really. So after a while, then we understand that, we don't need to get into the Spiritism or into a religion. We need to get the Spiritism or the message of Jesus inside ourselves. not our husbands or wives or children or boss or co-workers or the volunteers of the Spiritist Center, individually us. That's how things change. That's the message of John for us. He invites us for that inner transformation. And he clearly said, if you say you're a follower of Jesus, but if you do those things, I'm sorry, you were lying. On our face. Black and white. So if we are wondering where things are tough in life or things are not changing, we should reflect, what are we doing differently? What do I have to learn? Why does this lesson keep repeating? Like John said, repeating until you learn. When you learn, you can get something else. So our suffering, this is Spiritism help to explain, right? Our suffering, the afflictions in life, are here not to destroy us, but to teach us something. That is the beauty of it. That's the console, or the consolation that the Comforter brings to us. That's what Jesus meant. Right? So the gospel is an invitation for us to deep dive in our inner selves. And Jesus even said, I will send the Consoler to remind you. Because we know those things. Because the gospel is in our conscience. The law of God is in our conscience. When we are doing something wrong, we know. But we ignored or we've forgotten. And we are here to remember together. Together. Just to wrap up, I think the final part is the Holy of Holies. That's from the chapters 18 to 21. So the Holy of Holies is the last of the three spaces that we're going to talk about from the temple. It's the inner area where only the high priest enter in the Day of Atonement. So there's a particular day only for the high priest to go in, and the high priest go there to ask forgiveness for all the wrongdoings of his people, of humanity. That's where the Ark of the Covenant is, or was, with the tablets, with the Ten Commandments from Moses and other things. So it is a direct connection with God, and the high priest only goes there alone. No one else enters in that particular day. On the very chapter 18 is when Jesus is there in the garden with all the apostles, and then Judas comes with the guard, and Jesus is in prison, and he starts his journey alone. He starts his journey back to God through all his martyrdom alone. All the disciples run away. Just a perfect analogy, right? With that. So even in Paul's work, he calls Jesus as the high priest. Can't help. They're all connected, right? So he's the high priest, he is in prison, and then we see Judas betraying him, the denial of Peter, and the whole story unfolds from there. Until the cross, where John is there, the only one, with Mary. And then the crucifixion happens, right? And many people understand the crucifixion as the event that erased our sins. Jesus died, and he's paid our debt and erased our sins. What do you guys think of that? So it's pretty comfortable, right? I do all my wrongings, and Jesus died on the cross, so I'm absolved, I'm good. It's a symbol. It's a symbol. He paid the ultimate price that someone can pay to teach you something. He gave his life for love to teach us the extreme of forgiveness, compassion, love. He gave himself like the lamb, because the Jewish sacrificed the lamb. Even that analogy, that symbol is there. He just gave himself like a lamb. But that was to teach us how to love, what to do, even at the extreme circumstances. But for us to benefit from that, as John says, you have to do as I said, or to do as I did. He shows the path. It's up to us to follow or not. If we choose to follow, blessed are we. Reminding the Sermon on the Mount, right? That's all the suffering, that's his path. But blessed are we, because we are going to harvest from what we are investing right now. But if we choose not to, then we are going astray, and our suffering will just prolong. So it is a symbol. Again, the invitation for our inner transformation. And that's the end of the story, right? With Jesus on the cross, isn't it? A lot of people think it is. A lot of people think, well, when I look at the story of Jesus, it's so sad. A lot of suffering and violence and deception and abandonment and betrayal. Oh, it's a sad story. I don't like to hear about it. No, it's not a sad story. Because the story didn't stop there. Actually started there. Because he came back. Exactly on this chapter, he appears to so many people. To the disciples, to other people, including the one we are going to talk starting next week. Right? So he is back. People touch him. People eat with him. People talk to him. It's a story of hope for us. It's a reminder that we are immortal spirits. This life that we're living right now. Our aspirations for career, a better house, a better car, a husband who had a bit more muscles, or a wife that had a different color of hair, all that is going to go away. Sorry to tell you. What is going to be left with us is the things that we do to others. We are going to have what we give. Isn't it a strange thing to say? We are going to bring with us what we give to others. The more service we do, the happier we'll be. But the things of earth, they are all going to pass. Yes, we need our jobs, of course. But if we make our jobs the number one thing in our lives, we'll leave it aside one day. So we better prepare. Right? So it's a story of hope and reminding us that we are immortal spirits. Do not end on the cross. And that's why we encourage everyone to invest a little time, open the gospel, read it. It's not a magic book like the Harry Potter books that will see things coming out of it, coming to you and doing the dishes for you or things like that. No. Right? The inspiration for service over there hopefully inspires you to help your husband with the dishes, your wife with the bathroom, right? When the toothpaste is over, there's no paper towel. That's the gospel. That's the practice of the gospel. Because if you cannot help at home, how can we expect to come here to the Spiritist Center in front of the camera where everybody is seeing you and say, I follow the gospel? It's not going to happen. We're fooling yourselves. Right? Imagine our guardian angel looking at us at home. You fool. Right? We are just fooling ourselves. So the gospel is something that we practice everywhere. At work, when you have that colleague that is always in your back, trying to stab you in your back, that's an opportunity for you to practice what is written there. Forgiveness, tolerance. Right? It's alive. The message of the gospel is alive. No wonder John calls out so many times. Right? And now I'll leave you with this from Divaldo Franco as well. And he says, with Manuel Filomeno de Miranda, who is the spirit who gives this message, the psychotherapy of the gospel is the most effective medicine of the soul. And Dr. Bezerra de Menezes with Chico Xavier actually says, the gospel in our heart is the only effective medicine for our souls. And if it's a medicine, it's because we are ill. That's the truth. We are spiritually ill. And the gospel is the treatment. But we need to put the gospel into practice to be able to absorb and transform and heal ourselves. Right? So the invitation for all of us is, let's keep this alive. Come to Wednesdays with us. Study the gospel with us. If you can't, join us online. Have one of these books. There are books here. Get used to meditate, to read about it. Talk to people, ask questions. Get used to it. And maybe, as John said, pick one thing and repeat. And at the end of the day, evaluate how much of this I was able to do today. Or how much I couldn't do today. And why didn't I do? Why did I fail? I think it was because of pride or impatience. Why was I impatient? That's psychotherapy. You reflect on what we do and try to ask why, until we find the root cause. And when we find the root cause, we don't put it aside. It's there. No, we keep it with us. And we work until we rid ourselves. Or we change that for a good habit. Right? That's the message of the gospel for us, present in all gospels, but especially with a much deeper spiritual way in John. And there's so much we could talk, but I hope this at least gave you a little bit of desire to know John better and Jesus better. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, for the lecture. It was a pleasure. We do have a few minutes for questions or comments. Anyone? No questions? Anyone from the internet with questions or comments? No. Well, you mentioned about, you like a lot John. I did a lecture for Matthew, so I prefer Matthew. So.
It's good too. It's good too.
All right, so thank you, everyone. Thank you for those watching after the internet. We're going to get prepared for the passes now. All right?
Thanks, bro.
Thank you.